Welcome everyone to today's session. This is going to be all about how to get the most from Viva Engage. And in this session, we're going to take a look at some of the key insights from our 2025-2026 Viva Engage Benchmarking Report. So we're going to show you how you can use these insights to get your people engaged, really cementing Viva Engage as a key enterprise comms channel. And we're also joined by a great group of presenters and speakers today. So my name's Emily. I'm SWOOP Analytics Global Head of Growth and Marketing, and I'm also joined by my colleagues. I have Sharon Dawson here, the Director of Communications at SWOOP, and the brains behind our benchmarking reports. We've got Dr. Lawrence Lockley, who is SWOOP Analytics Chief Data Scientist. Sharon and Laurie are actually the authors or the co-authors of the benchmarking report, so we're very excited to have them here today to walk through the key insights. We're also joined by Kai Kerr, our CEO and co-founder, and we've got some of the other SWOOP team on the call today as well. We've got Gemma, and if any of the other SWOOP team are there, please jump in and say hello. We like to make these sessions as interactive as possible, so please do ask any questions throughout today in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll make sure that we try to get to those questions as well as we are walking throughout. We also have a few questions for you as we go through the session today as well, so be prepared to answer a few polls and things like that as well. Now, before we get in, I know that we've got a lot to cover off today, but I did just want to flag, if you need a little bit more time to dive into this topic and to dive into goal setting and benchmarks, I'd love to have a chat with you and I'd love to walk through how we can assist. So if you'd like some extra time, even just 30 minutes to walk through how your Viva Engage network stacks up, please feel free to book a time with me. I'm always happy to talk about Viva Engage. But in saying that, I'm going to hand over to Sharon and we're going to get straight into the data. So let's go.
Oh, thank you, Emily. Well, I guess as a bit of an overview to start with of our benchmarking findings, what we really found the standout was this shift in the way Viva Engage has been used over the past 5 years. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, you guys probably experienced this, those who had Viva Engage or EMEA at the time. You would have seen people were flocking to Viva Engage and connecting and communicating with colleagues on Viva Engage. But in the 5 years since then, we've seen an increase in Viva Engage being used as an official corporate communications channel. So in this webinar, we're going to dive into what that means for you, the change in the way Viva Engage is being used, and how you can take some simple actions to cement Viva Engage as your key enterprise comms channel. And we'll share the numbers that you can aim towards achieving to get the most out of Viva Engage. So we're also going to address the issue of information and noise overload across Viva Engage and internal communication channels. And we're going to give you access to a free tool we think is going to be a bit of a game changer. So as you can see on this slide here, in this year's report, we analysed the real life data across almost 17 million Viva Engage interactions from almost 3 million employees. And this was across 5,758 active Viva Engage communities and 73 organisations. So as Emily mentioned, we're going to launch a poll, and this is just to get an idea of how you use Viva Engage across your organisation. So just to get you thinking about how it's used. So can you tell us how important is Viva Engage in your internal communications channel mix? And you can see the polls just popped up then. Up here now. So is it an essential part of your comms channel mix, or is it an optional communications channel and some people use it? You know, maybe you've got it, but no one's actually using it, or maybe you're just starting out. And if so, we're going to be here to help you with this. So I'm so thrilled to see that the majority it's an essential part of the communications channel mix. We're at 52%, but yeah, a lot of optional people are using it as an optional comms channel as well. And great to see we've got some new starters in there as well. So we're definitely going to be able to help all of you guys to get the most out of Viva Engage here. So interestingly, what we can tell you from the data is that Viva Engage is actually a key enterprise comms channel, and we've got the numbers to prove it. So I'm going to hand over to Laurie now and he'll explain.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. Well, you know, we've been benchmarking Viva Engage now. It was EMEA before for this, I think was the 11th year And I think we can divide the sort of insights into the pre-COVID and post-COVID. So pre-COVID, pretty much Yammer and then Viva Engage was a community tool. It was basically for knowledge sharing, and this is what communities were central to Viva Engage. When COVID came along, it was adopted pretty much straight away as a communication tool because basically people were working from home. And what we have seen over the ensuing 4 to 5 years now is that the number of people that are actually on Viva Engage and reacting at least, has been continually going up. So we're seeing more people on the platform as internal communications have taken ownership of that channel. We're also seeing a big increase in the amount of tagging, and tagging generally we felt is a positive signal. It's when you're bringing people onto the platform, hopefully to participate in conversations, but nevertheless, getting people onto the platform to interact. It has been going up substantially in the last year or two. And the other positive thing that we saw is this use of, I guess, the people that are participating in more than a single community, right? So we measure this because it leads us into discussions around innovation and basically broadening your experience. So, if you're active in a number of communications, and you'll understand this in communities in your own external world, if you're active in a broader range of communities, you gain a broader perspective, greater insights, and in fact can lead to more innovation. So these are the good measures. They weren't all good, but we started with the good. I think in the report we called it the good, bad, and the ugly. But certainly, I think in a very positive sense, there are more people active on Viva Engage. Next slide. Thanks. So as I said, it's it is because Viva Engage, I think from when we had the COVID sort of pandemic, the leaders really had to find a way to communicate with people that weren't in the office, and that really did bring both the leaders and people onto the platform. But as I said, the fact that people are now tagging each other, being active in different communities, and together with our curiosity measure, which is really the number of people, the percentage of people that are actually asking questions, we're starting to see this platform for innovation starting to evolve now as people become more familiar with the platform. It's more than just a place to read things, but to actually interact with each other. So I guess this brings into, this is the good part, right? So more people on the platform and more potential for innovation. I think that's a pretty good message.
Yeah, and Laurie, in the report, we go into a lot more detail about, why we think it really is, or why we've got the data that does show that it's a potential innovation engine. And we go into even more detail about it being a key enterprise communications channel. But I guess what we need to do is to figure out how to capitalize on this knowledge and how to improve engagement on Viva Engage. So Emily, I'm going to hand over to you to explain how to do that. And I'm going to share in the chat the link to the benchmarking report and our success guides too.
Wonderful. We also have a few codes there on the screen if you'd like to use those. But I guess following on and looking at the actions of what we can do next, I think quite an obvious conclusion is that you can start using Viva Engage if you aren't already. I know that sounds quite simple, but some people still get confused about all the different channels and their strengths and their weaknesses. So to help you position Viva Engage within your organization, I would highly recommend you check out the Viva Engage success guide called The Role of Viva Engage in Your Internal Comms Strategy. Please do use that as a go-to resource. The common thread among all of the case studies and the experts that we have interviewed for that particular guide was that the superpower of Viva Engage is in its ability to enable more of those open conversations across the organization. So please do download the guide and use that to help you position it in the way that you talk about it internally. The next key action we need to take is to be much more deliberate about starting conversations on Viva Engage as well. And one of the really simple ways that you can do that is by mentioning and asking questions. These are really simple but really impactful things that you can do. So We have a few links to some blog posts, which you can read through. It'll give you more of a rundown on the importance of app mentioning, and it also gives you some examples on how to start as well. And I guess one of the other really important things as well is I would definitely suggest by starting to do a lot of that closer work with senior leaders and coaching them on the importance of app mentioning and asking questions. It does have really big short-term impact on the engagement that comes off the back of that. And then also finally, making sure that you promote your communities on your intranet as well. Profile the people in the conversations. If you can't find anything of interest, try to think about the things that really matter in your organization right now. What are those strategic priorities, and how could you start to set up a campaign to run something centered around that? A lot of the examples that we have been hearing about recently are centered around things like cyber awareness. Maybe it's centered around things like health and safety, AI. I'm sure a lot of you would already have dedicated communities discussing AI and Copilot best practice. But yeah, just making sure that you're choosing something that's top of mind for your organization. But I guess like while the use of Viva Engage is increasing, the way that it's being used is actually gradually shifting. And the truth is, like, we are a little bit worried about it, but in the benchmarking report, you will see that we have a bit of a story that we'd like to tell in the background. We're using this dance floor analogy as a great way to articulate the way that this works. So what we do is that we have, it's fantastic that we have more people that are on the dance floor at the moment. It's just that the people that are on the dance floor, they're dancing a little bit less. And what we would love to see are more couples coming together on the dance floor doing the cha-cha, and maybe fewer of those doing more of like the solo breakdancing type dance moves. So it's a really good way to bring this to life. And from here.
So some of the measures that we've picked up on around that actual interacting with each other. So certainly from the early days of SWOOP, we looked at engagement as people-to-people interaction, and a lot of our measures actually focus on how people interact with each other. So it's not as much interacting with information, but interacting with each other. Of course, it could be seeded by information. We hope it is, but largely a lot of our measures from day one looked at how people interact with each other. And what we're labeling the bad is that I think that certainly since Yammer moved into Viva Engage, and then after COVID, we're starting to see a lot of patterns that you may be familiar with on social media, where people will look at posts, they might like them, but the depth of interactions are fairly shallow, right? So and also the number of people that are actually posting new posts has been dropping. So we're not getting as many people there. As I said, they're showing up to maybe like something, but they're not necessarily showing up to post their own points of view. And if we go to the next slide, there's some even deeper measures around these. So we have a number of personas that we measure on personal behaviour. The broadcasting persona is pretty much people that send information out but don't actually respond too much themselves. So that's the classic broadcaster. We have another persona we call the engager persona, and this is somebody who actually goes out of their way to interact in a two-way fashion with people that they're interacting with, if you like. It's not just a like, but it could be a reply, it could be attracting a reply to yourself and so forth. It's a very important measure for us, and probably the most indicative measure of people-to-people engagement is this two-way relationship score. So in essence, you don't get counted unless you're in a two-way. In other words, somebody replies to you, you reply to them. That's a true two-way relationship. Now, over the last 5 years, we've seen these important sort of people-to-people engagement scores actually dropping. And that is a concern of ours. I mean, it was certainly higher in the early Yammer days, where community was the center of the platform. Now that the platform has taken on more of a communication sort of, nature, we're starting to see some of this two-way relationship scores starting to suffer. And I think, it's good to have people on the dance floor. Now we've got to coach them in how to behave on that dance floor in a very positive way for the organisation. So if we can go to the, so if we summarize that, the conversations are actually becoming shallower, right? So there often could be a post and lots of likes and or smiles or whatever your favorite interaction or reaction might be. We are certainly, certainly from the early days of COVID, it had become a broadcasting tool by necessity, in fact, because leaders had to tell people what was going on and what was expecting of them when they weren't working in the office. So that's fine, but we don't want to be overrun by broadcasting. And also, when Yammer was first created, it was created for knowledge sharing. It was creating a knowledge sharing through people interacting with each other, having deeper discussions, discovering points of view that they could debate, in a very safe place. This is how people learn. People learn from having those sorts of deeper discussions with each other, rather than what we're largely seeing now. So we think it's very important that we bring that back, and we certainly are seeing that in our leading communities. So don't get me wrong; it's not all ugly and bad. When we do measure out of those 5,000 communities, we pulled up a number that were really doing wonderful things, and certainly our case studies show that. But those are the ones where they're having quite deep and meaningful conversations about things that are important to an organisation. And I think that's something that we shouldn't lose from the early experiences with Viva Engage, as we start to bring more people onto the platform. So as we've got more people on the platform, we need them to participate in deeper conversations and really get this knowledge sharing happening on a company-wide scale.
But Laurie, we've found that outside research suggests that these behaviours, so the shallower conversations, the less replies and more reactions, it's not just limited to Viva Engage.
No.
I'd love everybody on the call today to think about whether you're seeing this same sort of trend on other social platforms, I guess especially in your private life outside of the enterprise, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, that sort of stuff. Are there less conversations and more reactions? So this leads us to the next poll, just to get you thinking about it. Are you seeing shallower conversations across Viva Engage and other platforms like Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, that type of thing? So the poll's just coming up here, and it'll be interesting to see how everyone's finding it, if this is unique. Oh, look, 100%. I know it's changing a little bit, but still 90% are saying that it's the same. It's not just limited to Viva Engage. Oh, a few are though, so that's interesting as well. So we can avoid that, and we can start to get some more in-depth conversations and knowledge sharing happening across Viva Engage communities. Emily's got some tips that you will be able to implement. So I'll hand over to Emily.
Thanks, Sharon. We always like to try and leave you with something that you can take away and that you can try. So off the back of these points, I'll suggest 3 key things. So first and foremost, I would strongly suggest really drawing on Viva Engage's superpowers. It's undoubtedly the best tool in the M365 toolbox to enable more of those open, transparent, two-way conversations that can span across organizational boundaries and cut through those silos. I know we've mentioned this a few times already, but we have published 7 different Viva Engage success guides that range all the way from the start of building the business case and positioning Viva Engage, which was spoken about, all the way through to nurturing communities, getting leaders on board, getting everyone else on board. And our most recent guide on managing information overload with Viva Engage is also a really good one. I highly recommend you check out. We'll dive into information overload a little bit more in the moment. If you are in internal communications, I would also recommend just resisting that urge you might have to treat Viva Engage as kind of just another channel, because it does have those special superpowers that make it different to the other platforms that you have there in the mix. And even just really simply, like the fact that you have showed up here today to learn about how other organizations are approaching this too, learn from the best and the ones that are the leaders around the world in using these tools. We've been featuring organisations at the Viva Engage Festival for many, many years now, also featuring those stories in the benchmarking reports. And we love to shine a light on those organisations and communities that are really drawing on those superpowers and sharing more of those stories. And speaking of sharing those stories and organizations that have found those superpowers, Sharon, I feel like we need to hand over to you to share some top performers that we need to congratulate.
Oh, I'd love to. And I just put a message in the chat there, Tom. I've got a really good example of some authentic leadership posts coming up. So, but firstly, let's go through these winners. So one of the best things I think about our annual benchmarking is identifying the world's top performing Viva Engage enterprise networks and also the top performing communities. So these are our 2025-26 Viva Engage champions. So in number one position globally for the top performing networks, this takes into account every community across that Viva Engage platform. So it might be your top performing and any like low performing communities, and then we rank them accordingly. So the number one is an Australian health insurer, Medibank, and it's the second year in a row Medibank's taken out the top spot. So in the report, we have a fantastic case study from the team at Medibank. Emily, can you share that in the chat if you get a chance? I've got a direct link to the case study. Number two globally is Westpac New Zealand, which is a bank in New Zealand. And number three globally was the British telecommunications company Quiva. So congratulations to everyone. And for the EMEA region, Quiva is the number one Viva Engage network. In number two was All Points Fibre Networks, and there's a great case study in one of our Viva Engage success guides, and it's all about how All Points Fibre Networks is dealing with information overload. There's some really good tips there I think you'll find interesting. And in third place was PHS Group. So as well as ranking the top performing Viva Engage enterprises, we also did a deep dive analysis into the 5,758 active Viva Engage communities, and this was across the 78 organisations we benchmarked. So coming in at number two globally is Schneider Electric. And in the report, we have a fantastic case study from Schneider Electric's top three Viva Engage communities. One of those was the one that came in at number two. So I really recommend you read that case study and you'll learn a lot from them. And the other top performing European organisation is Boehringer Ingelheim. So again, we've got a great case study from them to share with you. Although this case study is actually mostly focused on using SharePoint intranet in conjunction with Viva Engage. So it'll give you a good viewpoint of, using multiple internal communications channels. But coming in at number one globally in our ranking of Viva Engage communities, so this is just looking at communities, not entire networks, is an Australian state government department, and it's called the New South Wales Department of Customer Service. So in New South Wales, which is Australia's most populated state, this does so much. So it's basically the face of the government, and they'd have a lot of shop fronts around the state as well. But you might be surprised when you learn that this community is actually all about insurance and government regulation, which to me seemed pretty dry to start with, but I'll show you how it checks all the boxes for an engaged, an active and a thriving community. So when we identify the top performing communities in our benchmarking, we only have the ID number of the community. Everything else is anonymous to us. So we then contact the organisation. In this case, it was the Department of Customer Service, and we asked them to identify the community that we have the ID number of that we've ranked. And they look at when they looked it up this time, they were not at all surprised it had ranked number one. And it was because the community ticks all the right boxes. So I've put a bit of a list there. It's led by an engaging, authentic chief executive, and it's supported by a strong leadership team. People are asking questions and they're receiving answers. It's a safe space for people to share their ideas and opinions. There's a really healthy mix of posts praising and recognising colleagues and at mentioning them, but it's not all just recognising people. There's lots of learning and job development opportunities, and they're shared within the community. Most of the posts include images, videos or attachments, and they use data from SWOOP Analytics to monitor engagement and ensure messaging is reaching the right people. So this number one community, it's actually called the New South Wales State Insurance Regulatory Authority, or CIRA. See what I mean? It sounds pretty dry to me. But here's just some examples from this community. And this is the one, Tom, that I was mentioning about a CEO. So this is an example of the CEO of this State Insurance Regulatory Authority. And she's just doing some really authentic posts. So the first one on the left there, it's a selfie she took during a work from home day. So she's wearing business wear on top and active wear below. And then it's just like, 2 sentences, I think there. She asks her people to share their work from home secrets in the comments. So really simple, quick, but very authentic, and it got a lot of engagement. And the post on the right hand side, it's a photo she took from the train window on a work trip from the Central Coast in New South Wales back to Sydney. And then, again, she's just put 1 sentence in there just to get some engagement happening. So they're really simple posts, but they're authentic. And, obviously you can tell that they're authentic. Nothing's been scripted, and they get people engaged. If we move on to the next slide, you can see here, so what really stood out for us about this community is this lovely mix of the different types of posts. So these are some examples of Viva Engage posts highlighting the work of a colleague. So some recognition posts, but they're also highlighting some safe work principles, which is one of the principles CIRA has. So on the right, it's an example of a CIRA team member sharing a story of a colleague demonstrating one of the CIRA principles. And this particular one was about engaging with the community. And then if we move on to the next slide, this post on the left, you can see it's someone encouraging colleagues to donate blood during National Blood Donor Week. And you probably can't read them, but you can see there's some really supportive replies there. And on the right, there's an example of a CIRA team member sharing a secondment opportunity on Viva Engage. So just showing that really nice mix. And if we move to the next one, look, I know this is blurry, you can't really see it, but it's just to give you an idea, just to show you the consistency of the most engaging posts across the community. So this is actually a screenshot from their SWOOP Analytics dashboard of their most engaging posts. So there's no real standout posts in this community. Every post has similar strong engagement. Like there was hardly anything that just goes unseen or unacknowledged. So again, it's just this reflection of a very engaged community. So the Department of Customer Service, this is a really quick run through. We've got a great case study. We'll share the link to it in the chat. But the Department of Customer Service, it's a really great example of how to do it right and create that perfect mix of content that people are going to engage with, and the data is backing all of that up. But how do you know if you're doing so well? And, what does good look like? So this is where we can help you. And I'm going to hand over to Emily to give you some goals that you can aim to achieve.
Yes, so I guess before we get into some additional goals and benchmarking and getting into the specifics, we do have a very special guide which is dedicated to setting goals and how to tell if people are actually dancing. So highly recommend this one. It will introduce a lot of the benchmarks and the things to aim for. We do give you some ideas around the global averages, which you can use as kind of like a benchmark, but you could also start to dive into some of the slightly more ambitious goals as well, depending on how healthy your network is sitting and how two-way relationships and things are being guided at the moment. So this will help you to figure out what good looks like. We have goals that are also based on some of the top 20% of the highest performing organizations overall. Now, I'm just wondering, Sharon, do we have any other questions that are sort of emerging in the chat?
Yes, I was going to I see your one saying that 500 views is not great engagement, I think you mean, unless the team, there's about 700 people, and that is about the number in that community. So it's only just one section, like it's one department within that Department of Customer Service network. So I think it was, Laurie, do you remember the exact number? I think it was around 600, 700 people within that actual community. So it is actually with that government department, it was actually the community was the entire department, but I think it was around 600 people or so. And there's a question here from Mike. I'm going to hand over to Laurie about this one. Laurie, do you find engagement drops the larger the company or the community?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think largely that is the case. What you find in very big communities that people think that there'll always somebody else that will answer that question. So what we've found is that, some of the most engaging communities, some of the leading communities, you often don't find in head office or somewhere that's central to the organisation, but they might be in a more remote sort of site. So, I think one of the leading communities for one of our big US customers was actually in Canada, and I think in Australia we've seen some very big Australian organisations, but it's been the New Zealand branch, if you like, that's been very active. So I think there's something in that. It's not just the size. Sometimes it's the remoteness or the fact that, what we find is that if it's too big and too central, there'll always be a view that, well, somebody else has picked this answer up or what have you. But when it's smaller and maybe a little bit more remote, people feel that, well, I've got to step up because who else is going to do it? So I think there is an optimal size for communities, and pretty much, the research tells us somewhere around the 100 to 200 mark is actually an optimal size. Quite different to a team, which the optimal size is much smaller, but for a community, I think a lot of the research has been done. There's a lot of research been done on communities, and around that 100 to 200 seems to be the sweet spot for. Of course, if you only got that many employees, well, you can't have that many. But for the bigger organisations, I think that's sort of the sweet spot.
Some of the other questions, I can see Mike's got some questions about building a league table to compare leadership. And that is one of the things we find time and time again when we interview people and speak with people. Within SWOOP Analytics, we've got you can benchmark all of your leaders and just the gamification of it. And a lot of people say, I wonder if this resonates with most people. A lot of people we speak to say, to be in those C-suite positions, you do have a little bit of an ego often, and you want to be up there, you want to be performing really well. So it really works for people. We find that that's really beneficial. Kai, you've probably looked through the chat a little bit more while I was chatting. Is there anything else we've missed in as far as questions go?
No, I think I've been trying to keep up as much as I can, and I from what I can see. But thank you for everyone participating in the chat, and I also love all the knowledge sharing we've had about how to get senior leaders active and lots of different hints and tips being shared. I want to make sure that we try and summarize all that in a post event wrap up for you.
And
I feel like everyone's adding the wooden spoon idea to their list of things to try out after this session. We do. There's also a question in the Q&A I realised as well, and I think this might tie in nicely with what Kai will cover later about information overload, but maybe we could cover it now as well. So I miss out on posts because there are just too many posts. Would be curious to hear your recommendation on how to tackle that. If not, all posts are to be announcements.
Kai, are you gonna?
Sorry, I was terribly sorry. This is being
okay. It's the information overload question.
Yes, well, I was just responding to it. I was just putting something up in the chat, so I totally missed it.
No, that's okay. So it's just a question about missing out on posts because there's too many posts. So just wanting to. So someone's just curious about our recommendation on how to tackle that.
That's a real risk, actually, and we do have as a part of the research we did for the benchmarking report, we did talk to several organizations, and there was one that actually commented that they had a very, very, I think it was the whole company that was really, really active because they were posting, is that right, Sharon? It was like people movements in there, and it got so active. And actually what it meant was, so this is like, Sharon has been promoted, Kai's, moved offices or whatever, and people would come in and reply and like and comment and sort of praise and all that kind of stuff. Fantastic. And people love that kind of content. The problem was that it was drowning out all the official news. So you go in there, you might have missed an announcement. So if you're finding that's an issue, then certainly grab the addressing information overload with Viva Engage. It's our most recent success guide. I think in summary, you'd say that when you get to a certain size, most of the organizations we talk to, they start to introduce some of these publishing restrictions on the larger communities like all company, and then saying, well, only internal comms can publish in that one. They also start to then be more deliberate in encouraging people to join certain communities. So you can sort of try to address some of that. For smaller companies, we know that could be less of a risk or less of an experience that you might have. So, but for the bigger ones, I think that's most likely where it's likely to happen. So having clarity about the communities, about what they're for, who can post in there, I think that's some of the governance that you have to introduce as Viva Engage becomes more and more popular.
And of course, we'll be diving more into information overload in just a moment. You'll have to hold on to the line to see our very exciting new tool that you can try out today as we're working through. Now, the next part that I wanted to dive into as well is this is where we'll start to look at some really specific goals and getting you started with seeing how your network stacks up. And again, there's only so much that we can cram into an hour session together. If you are curious to see how your Viva Engage network is currently tracking, I would love to show you and walk through more of the sort of goal setting that you can get access to in tools like SWOOP. So if you are curious and you're not sure where to start, now's the perfect time. I'd love to have just a quick 30-minute chat with you and I can run through the way that we can set it all up. But from there, let's have a look and see what these goals and benchmarks are and how everything came to life in our latest Viva Engage report. So let's talk about what a healthy level of activity looks like on Viva Engage. So across the organisations we benchmarked, Viva Engage, the readership averaged about that 70% mark. So as a rule of thumb, a really healthy target for Viva Engage. If you're getting up to that 90% mark of reach, we would say that that's a really positive result. However, when we look at interactive users, these are the people who are actively participating, the people who are posting, they're reacting, they're replying, they're sharing information, and they're doing all of that at least once over a 6-month period. So it really doesn't require a lot for you to be considered as an interactive user. This year, the average that we are sitting at is at 31.6% across the 73 organisations that we analysed. I think some of the top performers actually got up to the 87% sort of mark. So if you are one of those networks that's slightly more mature and you're wanting to aim for that next level, then 87% or aiming for that sort of level would be really, really impressive. I think the big takeaway when I look at these sorts of numbers and I'm comparing readership to the people that are actually participating is that really big gap in those passive readers and the people that are actually those active contributors. So we're looking at a gap of about 50% or so. So if organisations can start to convert even just a small portion of those readers into actual participants, or even encouraging some of those people that have just kind of found their feet and are getting started into becoming more active in conversation, you should start to see a much more significant lift in engagement overall. I'll also just briefly chat as well about at mentioning and how often you should actually be tagging people in conversations. So tagging someone is a really simple way to invite them in, to ask them for their input, and it consistently helps to extend discussions. And we also have, really great research about why this has such a big impact. I think overall for the results that we saw in the past year, we have seen a small improvement on the amount of at mentioning, and we've also seen quite a steady upward trend now that we have been measuring Viva Engage networks for several years now. So we have seen the at mentioning starting to increase over time. Maybe that's a result of people joining these webinars and listening to us talk about at mentioning for a very long time, and you're implementing that as a tactic. So well done if you are doing that. But of course, one of the most interesting things about at mentioning is that it does generate more than double the engagement compared to an average reply to post rate. So while overall engagement metrics like two-way conversations and replies per post, they are trending downwards a little bit, being selective in the way that you tag and kind of implementing that as a more regular positive habit is something that will start to have a little bit more cut through over time. Now, if we look at the health of a Viva Engage community, one of the biggest risks that we find is that over-reliance on a smaller group of influential people to keep that conversation going. And it's actually quite interesting. If you look at, consumer or external social media, influencers help to drive that attention and revenue. You can really kind of clearly draw that line. But for an enterprise social network like Viva Engage, it serves a very different purpose. And the people that we see as influencers are actually more like connectors across the network. They bring people together. They're the people that you would naturally go to. They help to broker those relationships across the organization. And the challenge is that if a network becomes way too dependent on just one or two of those influencers or one of those sort of smaller hubs of influencers, if they, left the organization or if they took a bit of a step back from their activity on Viva Engage, it can have a very big impact on a community or on a network as a whole. So I would highly recommend that you reflect on what we call the influencer risk score. And that's going to tell you about, how much you are over-relying on those key influencers to drive the conversation forward. I think these results have been pretty identical looking at the previous year comparing to this year. A really good initial target is if you can get below that sort of 19% mark for that particular metric. So for those of you who are following along in a SWOOP dashboard, there's the comparable metric just underneath your influential people list where you can have a look and see how that stacks up. If you don't have access to a tool like SWOOP right now, then more than happy to have a chat and help you figure out how that might work. Now, when it comes to two-way conversations, when we talk about two-way conversations on Viva Engage, we're really talking about the signs that real relationships and connections are forming. So for us, we're looking at if one person, puts some information out there, they receive a reply back, and then they reply back to yours. There's more of that reciprocal exchange. And what we see that as is a stronger indicator of a strong relationship. So what we have seen for two-way relationships in the most recent, I can see that I've given myself a note on the slide that I will be presenting this one. So you picked up on the behind the scenes and I'm here
Lucky
presenting
you remembered.
Yes, of course. So ideally organizations, they should be aiming for 20% or higher because that's where we find that those activity volumes can look really, really impressive. And you should be really diving into this metric for specific communities. You should be looking at it for your network as a whole. You could start to dive in and see if there's trends emerging for certain segments. And the last one that I'll leave you with as well, which I will continue to present even though I am not prompted on the slide, is the curiosity index. And it looks at how many questions are being asked across the board, or the percentage of conversations that include a question mark, because we find that this is a really good indicator for how people are, sparking more of those problem-solving focused conversations. The conversations that lead to idea sharing and innovation. We have seen that the score, I think it was a slight improvement on last year, which is really great. And curiosity matters because it does encourage more of that rich discussion, more creativity, more two-way connections. But I would also say, if any of these numbers, seem a little bit outside of the things that you're focusing on right now, and you would like to spend a little bit more time to drill down and see how this all works, this will be one of the last opportunities. I'll share this link again if you want to have a chat. So I'm always happy to run through and chat about some of the benchmarks. Please do feel free to book a time and we can work it all out. Now I'm going to
jump in and just ask another question from Catherine, if you don't mind. And I'll hand over to Laurie to answer this. Catherine's asking, how important is it to get leaders using storylines versus posting in communities? And Laurie has actually done last year, or about 18 months ago, he did a whole lot of research into this, and we've got a pretty interesting answer. Over to you, Laurie.
Well, yeah. So basically, storylines wasn't working very well for most organisations. So if you're one of the ones that it is working for, by all means, keep going. But remember, storylines comes from the external social media. It was very much about promoting your persona to the outside world, and it seemed that didn't translate too well, other than in Microsoft themselves, into the corporate world. So really, the amount of engagement on storylines was really quite low. I think, posting communities, for me, I think that's probably better for internal communities, because it aligns you with a business purpose, right? So, if a leader's telling a story in an important community for your organization, that sets the context. Whereas if they posted it on the storyline, it's about me, right? So I personally don't think it's been much of a success in the corporate world, the storylines.
Laurie, I just want to add a little bit to that. The data that we looked at that across, we had 70 odd organizations in the benchmarking study. Not all of them had the storyline feature enabled, but many of them did. We don't know, the data that we have doesn't distinguish between, so capturing those that are leaders and those that are not leaders. Yeah. We can look at it like generally and say that you will get, so look at the whole pool of data, that there's more replies, more reactions when you post in a community. Now, leaders are a special breed of people, right? And they can actually, if you like, attract their own audience. And I would probably say that if you're struggling with getting someone, a leader, to oftentimes you create these leader communities, like a CEO corner or something like that. But if you got a senior leader, I would almost rather have them using Viva Engage and then using a storyline for the senior leader. But as a general recommendation to use storylines for individuals, I think that's a harder sell based on the data that we have. For senior leaders, we can't say it's not a good idea. I can't say that at all. I would probably do it a bit, try it out and see whether it works. We just don't have any. All we can say is that it's hard for us to justify that because you get less engagement compared to a community. But senior leaders could change the dynamics because of people's sort of just innate interest in what senior leaders do.
Interestingly, we also, when Laurie did this research, we reached out to the organisation that ranked #1 for the most, the highest engagement for storylines. And when we spoke to the community manager, she went and had a really good look at it all, and she said, "Oh, I think they all used it by mistake." It was a really high-performing network. It was one of the top ones, certainly within that top 5. But yeah, she thought it was actually a mistake, so she couldn't understand why they ranked so well. So that was sort of telling. Anyway, I'll keep moving on. So obviously, aside from storylines and leadership, one of the issues that we heard about so much, and we're hearing it in this chat now, is that people are feeling overwhelmed with communications, and that is leading to information overload. So we decided to address this head on, and we wrote a new Viva Engage success guide on how to deal with information overload. I'll share it again in the chat if you want to download it, the one Kai was referring to earlier. So as we were writing this guide, we came up with an idea we think is going to be a game changer for anyone involved in internal comms. So it's looking at all of your internal comms channels. But I'm going to hand over to Kai now to reveal all.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm going to try and share the screen, and there we go. So the concept is pretty simple. We want to capture basically how much internal communications being sent out. That's #1. And then also we want to find out how long time we should take to read it. Like, really simple, right? We compare the two, whether the time allowed matches how much people time available to read it. And then we can find out whether they overload it. So I wanted to show you how we can have a look at that. You head to swoopanalytics.com/information overload. You fill in a little form. Just so you know, the data that you put in here, we don't know what you're putting in. This form is actually not connected to the actual calculator where you put in the information. So it's we don't even record like IP addresses. So like we don't know anything. So you can use this in total anonymity. But once you get in here, you'll see this information overload calculator. And it's really simple. You start by figuring out how many, typing in your company profile. That's how many employees you have. You do that up here. So, and to make it really easy, I'm just going to click on the button that says load sample data. So in here, it's 50,000 people. We put in the number of managers as well, because they're also involved in cascading information. And then you can customize your channels in here. If you don't use video, I don't know, you can remove some of these, right? Removed, I don't know. Which one should we remove? Anyway, I'm removing town hall meeting just for the sake of it, right? And you can add another one if you want to. And once you've done that, that's kind of where a little bit more work is required on the content types. you add in how much you send out and how long time you think it'll take to read. So I clicked on add some sample data. So you can see here we got internal news stories that goes to 100% people 3 times a week, and that's posted on intranet and Viva Engage. So I can just say, let's say we're only using Viva Engage for that. I'll do that. And then I say, well, that's us here in the comms team that's doing that. And we think it'll take about 2 minutes to read each of these stories that we put out. And then it's really like rinse and repeats. Here we got departmental updates from leadership, HR updates, IT updates, quarterly results, and you just add and remove. Some of you, this is the feedback we're hearing, is someone saying like, but I don't know, like what old people are sending out. And therein actually lies a part of the problem. If you have loads of colleagues that are local, like internal comms partners that are sending out things you don't know about, well, then, it's hard to coordinate and see whether people get overloaded. So you put that in, how much we're sending out, and then down here you put in the time assumptions. And this is, I'm going to put in some sample data. But I guess like do a bit of a chat with your colleagues, ask in the canteen, how much time do you really think you have on a weekly basis to read the things that we are sending to you? So this is the attention window that we have for our colleagues, and then you do the same for managers. And once you put those two in, and you can be as generous, I remember having one person, they said they worked in a consulting company, and they said it is around 0 because everything is billable at billable hours. So it was quite funny. But I'm just going to put in 5 minutes. Listen, I'm not saying 5 minutes is right or wrong, but you can play with it, and you click calculate my information overload. And then you really get to the results, which they come down here. So in this case, because I changed it from 15 minutes to 5 minutes, this organization is heavily overloaded. And it is because what I'm sending out really requires 14 minutes a week to read. But I've told them that I'm only giving them 5. All right. So in this case, with everything that I'm sending out, if we calculate that into an hourly rate for employees, what we are asking them to read equates to $31 million. Now, internal comms, and I know many of you on the call today, we see you as the people that safeguard that investment. And you make sure that it's not being wasted. It's the right message getting to the right people at the right time. Because if we send out too much, people won't read it, and our credibility and leadership trust is eroded. So that's why we think it's so important that these things that should go out to people, that there's actually either enough time for people to read it, or we start sending out less so it fits within the attention window that people actually have. And you can play around with this. Like you can see, we've broken this up then by what kind of content types are you investing most money in? And money in this case is the attention budget in dollars for the audience. And the same by the communication channel. So I hope you'll have great fun with this. We know that lots of companies have been playing with this, and we're hearing great feedback how this stimulates conversation about how we can start to address information overload, and also how you can make smarter investment decisions about what platforms that you need to you work with. And of course, from a selfish perspective, measurement becomes really important, because if you are investing this much money in getting some content out to an audience and you want them to do something, you want to achieve a goal around leadership engagement, two-way conversations, then metrics become important, because otherwise you don't know how close you are to getting value from that $31 million. Back to you, Emily and Sharon.
Thank you. I will take control back of the screen. And I'll take it back to where we were. Fantastic. And I think what's great is that we actually have a little bit of extra time to cover off extra questions. So if anyone wants to jump in shortly and ask any questions to the presenters today, please feel free to. But before we head off today, we would also love to hear your thoughts about today's session. We're always keen to hear if you have any ideas or feedback off the back of these events that we run. We want to make sure that they're valuable and you walk away with something really useful to apply to your approach to internal comms. So please do jump in. It's a very short few quick questions that will help us to shape these sessions in future. And then also I want to make sure, and thank you, Sharon, for sharing the link as well. And then we also have our resources that go alongside what we've looked at today. So of course, please jump in and try out the information overload calculator. I've also seen the link shared a few times in the chat, and also seeing some love for the calculator already, which is fantastic. We have received such great feedback and input about the calculator. So we'd also love to hear how it's useful in your organization as well. And then please do also download the Information Overload Success Guide, which I think we've referred to a few times. And if you haven't had an opportunity to already, where have you been? You need to download the 2025-2026 Viva Engage Benchmarking Report. So if you need to have that go-to guide for the year ahead, use it for inspiration in the case studies, use it to set those goals. We'd love for you to rely on that to take your Viva Engage network to the next level this year. But in saying that, I will open it up for any other questions if anyone would like to jump in. Please do keep questions going in the chat or in the Q&A if you feel more comfortable asking there. But I will invite you to come off mute if you would like to raise your hand and jump in. We're here to help.
And while we're just waiting, Emily, with the report that's on the screen now, if you did originally download it when we first released it, it has been updated. So we've got a few more case studies in there now. We were just waiting on the approval process to include those. So download it again because you'll get some new case studies in there. And I've just got to make a comment about from Rosie here saying, oh no, I've lost that message. It's saying that it's really helpful that that others are facing the same challenges, and that's one of the things we really want to do at SWOOP too, is create these communities. Emily, I know in the pipeline you've got hoping to get some more get-togethers, some more webinars like this, and some masterclasses where people can come together. We can all share our ideas. So that's something Emily's planning on doing. I don't know if you've got anything set yet, Emily, but it'll be coming this year, right?
You will receive more details shortly. We have a very exciting big event that we have coming up in May, which we're just about to share some details for. That will be our SharePoint Intranet Festival coming up. But otherwise, throughout the entire year, you'll please do join us for our masterclasses and our other events. So we'll make sure that you have all of the details after this today.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's been fantastic being with you.
There's a great question here from Katie. Interested to hear if there are any experiences of launching, promoting the use of Viva Engage with deskless frontline colleagues, either via mobile or tablets, as they don't use laptops. So this is about frontline workers. Kai, Emily, have you got examples?
Like everyone I've spoken with on this, like this is a tough nut to crack. I think what makes it particularly hard, and you go back to the conversation we had about information overload. I think first of all we got to figure out what is it we have that is of value to people on the front line, deskless workers. Like what is the content we have? I think that almost the channel is almost less important. Like most of the companies I talk to is like the value proposition for the frontline worker. You might have, I met someone in the US and they were basically cleaning rooms in a hotel. Like what information can we give to them that's relevant for them? And let's be frank, it's not the corporate strategic 5-year plan or the global health and safety initiative or the cyber awareness month. That's not what they're interested in. So, and I think maybe that's where, as a community, we got to think a lot harder. That's just my own observation about what really matters to them. If it's something, and that's why things like where your pay slip and leave calendars and those things are just more relevant. And maybe we're just asking a bit too much from all of us to have content that's relevant out there. We can see from our global benchmarking on SharePoint intranets that the mobile uptake on intranets, at least based on the data that we have, is not particularly high. So maybe it's just not the thing you do on your mobile, just maybe, and I hate to say that because I'm a big fan of digital, but just maybe the team leader, at the canteen in the office is a better conduit for getting information than a digital platform. I don't know.
We did have a couple of case studies, Sharon, didn't we, where they, especially one with the Home Depot one. It was one where there was the call the expert, like if you're in a store and you have a measurement issue. I mean, there was actually 2 people who just answered questions on measurement. Like if customers
true.
said, "Oh, how do I measure this and that and what have you?" They acted as brokers for the whole network. So there was enough value in it for the company to have two people employed just directing question traffic. And clearly they were coming from people on the shop floor, potentially even talking to a customer, and and they would quickly direct people to, and that's actually that's been a leading community for several years. I think they've in our benchmarking. So, and they're not the only ones that have done it, but if you've got an area that is very rich in terms of the questions that frontline staff are receiving, it could be worth your while just setting up a community that just facilitates those questions in really close to real time, actually. So it's like find the expert, so it can be done, so.
I think something interesting as well is that we do normally have that really big focus on senior leaders and executive teams being on board and visible. Of course, that's going to be really important. But when we're looking at frontline teams, working, on the front line, they don't necessarily have desks to sit at. I think even thinking about the leaders that are in their immediate periphery as opposed to like looking at the ones that are right at the top. So the people that they're interacting with as their leaders on a day-to-day basis, I think they're a really important audience to capture in getting on board with the tools so that their direct teams are also bought into it as well. Certainly things that I've seen in my experience and also working with customers across the board who are frontline teams, that seems to be one of the keys to success there too. But I realise we're on the hour. If you do have any other questions, please do feel free to jump in. We'll hang around maybe for another few more minutes. But I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone for participating today. Anyone who's dropped a message or a question in the chat, anyone who has put in a little reaction, anyone who has come along for the ride and you've taken something away today. So really appreciate it. We'll share the slides and the recording after the session as well. And thanks again for participating.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.